I also got a haircut.
Okay, so like I was saying, the main thing I want to do today, especially since Sid isn't able to be here, is just review the exit criteria and make sure everybody's good with that. I want to consider it mutable. Like we'll still make tweaks if we need to as we identify new things, but in general, I'd like for that to be pretty solid. There's a link to the MR and the doc. Can you guys see my screen okay? I think maybe you're muted. 1 second. Let me make sure it's not like a host setting thing.
Yeah, we can see where I gave you the thumbs up.
Oh, okay, great. Yeah, so the first thing here, which is already planned as far as I understand it, is to migrate relevant systems, particularly customers dot from Azure to GCP. I believe that infrastructure committed to doing this in the most recent, or the engineering allocation from the end of last month, in terms of supporting that effort. But that would be the first step we're looking to achieve here. And then building on top of that, we're looking to initially just have improved observability of these applications. I think the accidental customer downgrades could have potentially been avoided if we had been alerted to the fact that we were seeing those webhook failures. So, even if we don't fix all the bugs with the applications, just having better observability into them should go a long way. So yeah, like this is application level stuff that would be supported by the migration and consolidation into our GCP stack, but we would then need to make the application level changes to have improved logging, observability, and better defined metrics. From there, the third step is that, and some level of documentation has already gone into like the overall system architecture and understanding the service boundaries. I think the main thing that Jerome wanted to achieve here is like really having like formal documentation for the service boundaries, beginning to like reshape the data models to standardize them across the various services, and that should ultimately lead us into identifying like a single source of truth for each of the data models. Where were those diagrams that you shared with me the other day, Jerome, about the different gates that we would need?
I think you're talking about quote to cache.
Is that it?
Is that right? Yeah, it should be that first link. This is something put together by Brian's team, which outlines basically the whole quote to cache process.
Yeah, so I think, and the original ask, at least from my perspective on all this, was that McBee, I think, was like a bit surprised that we had not only no mechanism for human review on anything, but no easy path towards even implementing human review for things like automated downgrades. I think going forward, there's clearly been identified like a number of processes in these workflows that we would at least like the option to gate with manual review. So rethinking the architecture and making sure that we have robust support for various forms of manual review to be able to achieve all the different like purchasing flows essentially.
On one of the things that when I was talking to Sid, we got confused on, I got confused at least on what we were discussing around is observability. And I think we need to get very specific about the three different areas, right? So we've got some core infrastructure observability that needs to be done. And I'm sure that Steve and team have got sort of the framework for how they measure these services from sort of a core infrastructure piece. Then there's observability on the application layer itself, which I think you're really trying to call out there. And then we specifically have some observability on data flow and how it aligns to the actual processes that we're thinking of. I don't know if we need to, maybe you tried to call it out there, but maybe we need to make it more specific.
So you're saying you want to accommodate the data flows and better observability there?
I think we need to do all three. So that when we're talking about observability, we understand which one we're talking about. Because Sid had asked me a question, and I thought he was specifically talking about the data flow and integrations, and I was not. And then it took us a second to realize, oh, you're talking about some application level observability, application logging specifically. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we have the whole infrastructure component as well.
Yeah. So my assumption, Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, is that I don't think we would do the Azure to GCP migration without also layering in all like our standard observability stack, right? So in terms of like monitoring the overall health from an infrastructure perspective, at least we should more or less get that for free.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, I wouldn't use the term for free.
Sure. Yeah.
But because there's I think the thing that is kind of blocking right now is that there's a good amount of work to be done to implement that, and I think the Jerome and the team have identified basically what they want to see in the end. I mean, right now, what it exists in Azure is pretty much a simple pingdom check, and they've made it clear that what they want to see in the new environment is more of the kind of full stack of observability tools that are similar to what we would use in or modeled against what we would use in GitLab.com, and also not just what we would include in GitLab itself, right, from kind of like an auto DevOps standpoint. So that gives observability to the kind of underlying infrastructure and the operation of the GitLab components there. I think what and maybe it provides a little bit of functionality for some of the I guess application instrumentation or business data you want to get, but for example, and I don't know the ins and outs of like the problems mentioned earlier, like with the webhooks. So maybe that provides an ability to capture some of that data, but it wouldn't on its own,
right?
Like create the full observability notification and like that's not going to be the type of event that, for example, SREs are going to respond to. So.
Yeah, it makes basically like my assumption is that we're going to go straight to GKE, and then we'll be able to like leverage the same sorts of mechanisms for log aggregation that we do elsewhere.
Right. Yeah, and I mean other observability as well. So I mean you would have the
Prometheus metrics and everything.
Standard set of tools.
Yeah. So I think that like I don't know what we would need beyond like robust application logging in order to be able to capture those data flows. Brian, if you're thinking that like we need something that sits at the like ingress boundary before stuff even hits the application and like logging that way, is that the idea?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is over time we haven't done enough in the way of here's the quote to cache process. I'm sending something from the portal into Zora, and we don't have retry capabilities or logging that says this didn't happen, queuing mechanism. Like it's been very binary from, and I'm just to be clear, I'm speaking with some ignorance. I have not gotten into all the details, so apologize if I'm making it too simple, but that's what I've seen. And so from a data flow perspective, it's one thing to say, hey, the application's sent something, and the application may have said it sent something, but we have not gotten to the level of detail to say, yep, I acknowledge that data did flow into something else, or it did not flow, and I need to do a retry, or I don't even see the other system. I need to queue some things here for a little bit. Like, I don't think that has been built into the architecture.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think before we can even make decisions about what that should look like or where it should live, we sort of need to get to the last step of like identifying what component exactly is going to be the source of truth for like the various data structures involved. Because I don't want, I mean, I wouldn't want to like build anything that makes any assumptions about like the current process, really. I just don't know, like, and again, part of this is just my naivety towards the application. I'm gonna have to develop some understanding there, but like, yeah, I agree with you. I just don't know what those mechanisms look like, so I don't know how to observe them. But I'm with you.
Yeah, I'm also thinking like, so today, this environment does not live in the Google space. It's still on Azure. So I'm also thinking about what the right order of work that needs to occur. Like, and again, I don't know for a fact, but like, how much does changing it over to Google, is that going to change some of the application logging capabilities because of just the framework, underlying framework? Maybe not. I don't know the answer to that. So
I think it's less about Google, like specifically, and just having the opportunity to standardize on the tools that we use for monitoring the rest of our infrastructure, right? So like theoretically, we could set up a log aggregation stack within Azure. It's just, in my opinion, not worth doing, because we would just do it the way we do everything else.
No, I think you and I are in total agreement. I just my question is there a right work order of things to get done here? Like, do we how far do we go down setting that up in Google, and then specifically using customers data? And it's like, okay, but it's not on the Google stack yet. It's still on Azure.
Yeah,
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm bringing it up.
Yeah, and my understanding is that like we're hoping to have that done by the end of January. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that, like, Jerome, the date we have for that is mid-January for the switchover, right? 15th or
Yeah.
something.
So down below under number 5, I've pasted in the latest timeline. So I think ultimately, like, we're discussing exit criteria right now, and then eventually we start working backwards and put this all into a Gantt chart. My thoughts on your question, Brian, would be that there's some things that we can do in parallel to the infrastructure migration. So the infrastructure migration really is, back to Steve's point, you start with a little bit of logging and then you start adding more. So we're starting with, let's just get everything off of Azure over to GCP as quickly as possible, because Azure is just not sustainable anymore. So let's get it over with our pingdom checks. And just, have very, very high level checks in place. And then once we have it over, then we can start integrating the whole GKE monitoring stack. So that should take care of most of the infrastructure type of logging. Now for the application level logging, this is where it really depends on data flows. And this depends on, what are all of our systems? Which systems do we want as that source of truth? Where do we want the data to flow? And based off of that, we should implement logging in each of our respective applications. So logging inside of customers dot, inside Platypus, inside Zuora, etc. So I think, in short, I think the infrastructure migration can be done in parallel to us defining our sources of truth and data flows, because there's different teams working on them.
Thanks, Jerome.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think basically, like, as far as the exit criteria we have defined right now, I'm thinking 1 and 2 can largely be worked in parallel, and then 3 and 4 can probably also largely be worked in parallel.
I think it sounds like we all agree on the exit criteria. Is there anything that's missing?
Steve, does your team already have a set of SLAs for guidance here? I don't, it'd be interesting to reuse some of the maybe framework that you're already putting in place for some of this. I don't know. It's an open question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I would expect that we would want to reuse, I mean, whatever we can, just to be most efficient. To be clear, there's nobody engaged in this right now, and they won't be engaged in it until the beginning of January. But one of the things that we've discussed and also have in the kind of the end of the timeline there is to have the SLO established after we've got the migration done and the engineering allocation is completed. That then we also do with the completion of the production readiness review, that would lead into being able to have an SLO that we're then monitoring.
And I did make sure to loop Mac into this too, because I think the current scope of quality does not involve being very opinionated about like code quality standards, right? But I was thinking like it might be a good opportunity to maybe start to define some of that, just because like this is obviously a mission critical application, but at the same time it's like relatively small and isolated. So I was hoping that we might be able to like use this as sort of like a case study in improving our quality standards. So I hope to have representation from that team going forward.
100% agreement on that one, Marshall.
Did we want to cover number 3? It was Mech's comment about quality engineering counterparts and who from quality will be involved.
Yeah, so when I originally reached out to him, he said that he would take point in terms of quality's representation within this working group. But it looks, I think he's saying that we should reach out to Vinci and she'll tell us who the best candidate is. So I'll take that as a follow-up for myself.
Yeah, as far as number 4, we can skip over that. So I found the MR for
that. I can provide a quick update on number 5. So the 2 exit criterias of the migration and then adding the logging and observability. I pasted in an update from our InfraDev engineering allocation. Currently, this is about 68% complete. We have staging set up and we're currently working on getting production fully set up. One of the key blockers was trying to figure out how we actually wanted to do the data migration from Azure's production over to GCP's production. Originally, we were going to go with a database replication approach, but instead what we're going to do is basically do a dump and restore and schedule a quick outage window because it's just the easiest way for us to move forward. I've included the latest timeline down below. So hopefully within this week, we'll have production GCP set up so that we can run it in parallel to Azure and just have that run throughout December. That timeline is very tight though, since it is just the last week, but I think it'd be great if we could continue pushing forward on this. And then on the 3rd of January, the infrastructure squad starts to begin work on some of the fulfillment projects, namely the production readiness review, and then the customers.monitoring of GKE clusters. And then by the 17th of January, that's when we're hoping to do the full cutover from Azure to GCP. And then we're going to wait a couple of weeks before closing the engineering allocation at the end of the month on January 31st. And then in the following quarter, what we're going to do is we're going to try to work towards establishing a SLO. So that's what we have planned so far. This includes pieces of the exit criteria, but I think there's probably more that we'll add here since these two work streams are getting merged together. But Steve, did I miss anything that we should add here?
No, I think that makes sense. I mean, maybe I'll just comment on the decision around doing the dump and restore. And I know that I had given you some input on that, and it sounds like the team got together and made a decision on this, which is good to see. Just calling out again, or maybe highlighting that this approach will involve some downtime, but I think at a high level, it is a much less complicated approach than the other alternatives of kind of running in parallel and running replication, and especially given the history of and kind of like flakiness that we've seen on Azure, running the risk of having database inconsistency and everything in a replicated setup. And so, but kind of, again, I'm not way into the details of all that they discussed, but I think like at a high level, that's generally the idea, is that we're better off from an overall risk standpoint, just taking and a maintenance window, an outage, and doing the cutover that way.
Yeah, that certainly makes sense to me. The only question I have is, are we at all concerned about the integration touch points of this system during that outage window? Like, do we have a way to pause all the webhooks that would come from Zora or something like that, so they don't hit their, like, I don't know if there's like a maximum number of retries so that we don't hit that while the system's down?
This is something that we need to unpack a bit more as we lead up to it. So
Okay,
I think
yeah,
what we're doing now is we're preparing a production rollout issue. And this is where we'll loop in folks from the Zora team. Brian, is there someone specific that would be best to take a lead on that?
Yeah, it's going to be Jessica Salcido.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll get James, who's the engineering manager that's leading this from the fulfillment side, to touch base with Jessica.
Yeah, I think what I'd ask Jessica too is a quick smoke test after it's up and running. Before we get into full blown testing cycle, there should be a simple like, hey, yes, at least connectivity is occurring, and I can see some things. So definitely ask James to talk to her about what that initial quick test would look like.
That sounds good. Any other questions on number 5? Otherwise, I'll move down to number 6. So for number 6, for the 2 other exit criteria were data models and touch points between integrations and services, and then just defining the single source of truth. We started discussing this in the order to cache fusion team, but that meeting covers a lot of the initiatives that go across order to cache. So I'm thinking whether it makes more sense to have some of the system owners join this meeting so that we can start talking about data models and data flows. So we probably need a system representative of Salesforce and another one of Platypus and another one of Zora, all present.
You said of Zora, Platypus,
Zora, Platypus,
Salesforce.
Salesforce,
that's right.
and then customers dot. I've got engineers in mind for the customers dot side of it that I can loop in. So I'm guessing for Platypus, it's probably going to be Daniel Parker.
It's Daniel, yeah.
Zora, possibly Jessica.
Well,
Yeah.
it's probably going to be, I mean, Jessica's the doer, right? So for the change management piece, that's the person, but it's going to be a combination of really Mark Q and Courtney Maddow. I mean, there's some different elements to that, and they kind of specialize in both. We'll have to check base with Christopher Nelson to make sure. And then Salesforce, we'll have to check with Jack Brennan, but it's probably Matthew Rourke from a higher level architecture point of view would be who I would suggest.
And regarding Platypus, is like, if just for the sake of argument, if we were to time box this thing to, like, let's say 4 months, do we think that it will be ready for prime time? Like, is there any chance that we would be able to leverage it?
Absolutely, we're ready to go. It's I'm not going to say there isn't work to be done, but yeah, it's the platform itself is, we want use cases, we want to get it going. Okay. So we're already using it in a couple spots, and we're ready to roll. Yeah, Jerome, I'm sorry. Going back up to number, I have to admit, I'm starting to get, I think the sooner the better for 0.5 and really digging into that change management aspect. And then also, we are going to need to follow some pretty good change management practices because we're talking about Zora. And so some of this stuff is really going to potentially be in SOC's purview. So we'll want to get Jessica to think about all of that stuff. I'm even thinking about, reconnecting the integrations, any service accounts, getting into the details. We'll have to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, Brian, we have change management actually under number 6.
Oh, is it under 6? Sorry. Okay.
AI1.
Well, it's kind of
both.
It's kind of both, actually. But okay. And I'll work with you on that one, Jerome. I mean, Christopher's all over that too, so we'll get there.
I think that's everything for number 6. Marshall, are you thinking like a weekly session to keep us moving along on this, or
yeah,
what were you thinking?
I was thinking weekly. I don't know if it makes sense to do anything again before the start of the new year. I don't know what everybody's availability in this call looks like, but I know Sid is going to be out till the end of the year. So I think that just depends on what we expect everybody's team availability to be.
I think for fulfillment, maybe we can kick it off in the new year. I think we've got quite a few team members out starting Friday.
I'll look at everybody's calendar, but just expect something to be scheduled for the first week of the new year.
Cool, thank you.
All right, we're over, and I'm late for another meeting. Marshall, thanks for getting this meeting set up.
You bet.
Talk to everyone
Yeah.
later.